We're going to get started with the program. Hello, I'm Donna Lucas, and I'm delighted to be here today representing the Board of Directors for the Public Policy Institute of California. And we are so delighted and pleased to have a California Senate's pro tem, Darrell Steinberg. I'm going to leave the script for 1 minute here and just take a note of personal privilege and say I've known Darrell for many, many years, Senator Steinberg, and he has accomplished a lot for California public policy in a variety of areas, from mental health to education to higher education, the environment. But he will be loved here in Sacramento forever for his tireless efforts to keep the Sacramento Kings in Sacramento. Go Kings. I couldn't help myself. Anyway, this event is part of PPIC's 2013 Speaker Series on California's future. This event would not happen without our sponsors, and I'd like to take a moment to thank them. They include Applied Materials Foundation, the California Endowment, the James Irvine Foundation, Nicholas Berggruen Institute of Governance, Pacific Life Foundation, the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation, Sierra Health Foundation, Southern California Edison, Stewart Foundation, Union Bank, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and our knowledge partner, McKinsey & Company. So let's give them a round of applause. And I should also mention that the PPIC donors circle is also a contributor to your free lunch today, so enjoy. Before we begin, 2 housekeeping items. First, please take a moment before you leave today to fill out the evaluation cards on your table. As you all know, PPIC is always asking questions, so we want to ask your questions about how good this event is. And second of all, take your cell phone out right now and turn it off, because when the pro tem is speaking, if your phone goes off, you're going to be really embarrassed. So please do that. Now on to the program. We're going to hear first from Julie. I know I'm going to blow this, Julie, so I'm going to practice it again. From Julie Chevette, our researcher from PPIC. And she is going to come up and briefly discuss some key findings from the latest PPIC statewide survey on Californians in their government. After Julie's remarks, Senator Steinberg will join PPIC President Mark Baldassare and to discuss some very important information, very important issues facing California. So with that, Julie.
Thank you, Donna. Today I will be talking about some findings on questions that we asked regarding the state budget in our most recent PPIC survey. We began interviewing for this survey on May 14th, the day the governor released his revised budget proposal, and completed interviews on May 20th. Starting with some general attitudes towards the state budget, 6 in 10 say that the state budget situation is a big problem for California today. Though still a majority, this share calling the state budget situation a big problem is slightly lower than in previous surveys conducted since last May. With majorities seeing the state budget situation as a problem, how do they view their local services being affected by the state budget? We found that nearly 6 in 10 Californians say that their local government services have been affected a lot due to recent state budget cuts. Across regions, majorities hold this view, except in the San Francisco Bay Area. Next, looking at opinions of Californians on Governor Brown's revised budget proposal, we found that overall Californians are in favor, with 61% saying that they favor the governor's revised budget proposal. The revised plan includes increases to K-12 education, higher education, health and human services, corrections and rehabilitation, and also creates a $1.1 billion reserve while paying down debt. Across parties, support is high among Democrats, and independents also favor the revised plan, while Republicans are divided. Similar to what the governor proposed in January, the May revise also focuses on paying down state debt while building a reserve. This could potentially become a contentious issue if lawmakers seek to restore some of the cuts made to social service programs in recent years. When asked about their preferences between paying down state debt and building a reserve, or restoring some fundings made to social service programs, we found that 55% prefer paying down debt and building a reserve. Across parties, 3 in 4 Republicans and 2 in 3 independents also have this preference for paying down debt and building a reserve, while Democrats are deeply divided in this fiscal trade-off. An area where the governor proposes to increase spending is K-12 education, and we asked about 2 major components of his K-12 spending plan in this survey. On the proposal for allocating $1 billion in one-time revenues to implement the Common Core State Standards, which are new English and math standards that the state will roll out in 2014. We find high levels of support, with 73% of Californians saying that they support this proposal. Support is very high also among public school parents, as well as among the state's various racial and ethnic groups. A key feature of Governor Brown's revised K-12 spending plan involves giving more money to all school districts and giving extra funds to districts with more English language learners, as well as lower income students. And once again, a strong majority of Californians say they favor this proposal, with 77% of Californians holding this view. And again, the public school parents, as well as strong majorities among the state's racial and ethnic groups, favored directing money in this way. So in summary, we find that Californians still see the state budget situation as a big problem and say that their local services have been affected by state budget cuts. Majorities favor Governor Brown's revised budget proposal, and they prefer paying down debt and building a reserve over restoring cuts to social service programs. Strong majorities support Governor Brown's K-12 funding plan, both for directing funds to the state's more disadvantaged students, as well as allocating funds to implement the Common Core State Standards. Now I would like to invite Senator Steinberg and PPIC President Mark Baldassare to the stage. We look forward to your conversation. Thank you.
Senator Steinberg, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
And Donna, thank you very much for that wonderful welcome. And Shui, thanks very much for that presentation. I also want to acknowledge that our board chair of PPIC, Gary Hart, is here today, and our board member, Steve Merksimer, and one of our statewide leadership council members, Karen Skelton. So thank you for joining us. What a privilege to be here with you today. The last time we were on a stage together was January 25th, 2012. And we were talking about the state budget and state and local relations in a very different atmosphere than we have in California here today in terms of the economy and state budget situation. So what a difference. You know, in the climate that we're in today. Nonetheless, always lots of challenges and opportunities in leadership. And before we launch into the questions, I just wanted to, for those of you who don't know Senator Steinberg, and I'm guessing that most of you know him, and as I mentioned to Senator Steinberg, this is just a wonderful turnout for this event. I mean, very large and significant group people assembled here today. Senator Steinberg was elected in 2006, became the pro tem in 2008. Before he served in the Senate, he spent 6 years, the full term, between 1998 and 2004 in the State Assembly, and has also had experience in local government, and so comes to us today with just a wealth of experience, having been pro tem for 5 years. And I want to start by talking about some of the work that's going on right now in the Capitol. June is always a busy and interesting time of the year. And this June, different from most of the Junes that I've seen in recent years. But thinking about the work leading up to the budget deadline, what do you consider your top 3 priorities this year?
Well, first of all, Mark, thank you for having me. And thank you to the PPIC, wonderful nonpartisan organization, for all the people who are here today. And I look forward to this conversation. My top 3 priorities in the budget this year are restoring adult dental care for people who lost it as part of the budget cuts of 2009, poor Californians, the majority of them working poor. 2, to invest significant infrastructure in rebuilding California's mental health system. A lot of detail there that I'm happy to talk about that I think it is important. And 3rd, we want to invest significant dollars, even on a one-time basis, in dramatically expanding vocational education and/or career technical education, depending on what you want to call it, in California's high schools. I would add a 4th priority, if I might, because maybe it's the overriding priority.
We'll call it 3A.
And that is to do all of that and to maintain a balanced budget with a healthy reserve. And that is, I suppose, maybe just a moment of digression, because you mentioned how different it is sitting up here on stage today versus the last time. Last time we sat on stage together, the voters had not even considered Proposition 30, and there was actually some doubt whether or not there was going to be a unified ballot measure. We were still facing, I forget what the number was now, but something along the lines of a $12 to $15 billion deficit. And if you go back to 2009, when I took this job, I might have joked the last time, but now I can really joke that I was the guy that drew the short straw when it came to the pro tem race, because I took this job in the beginning of 2009, and of course the state budget deficit ballooned to $42 billion. No cause and effect between the two, by the way. So my 4 years of leadership have really, of course, been dominated by the fiscal crisis. 2 governors, different legislative leaders. I'm actually the only one left standing from that 2009 period. And I cannot say it was a fun experience, but it was rich and meaningful, and I think very, very important that we were able to take the budget deficit from $42 billion to $26 billion to $19 billion to $11 billion, and then with the passage of Prop 30 to balance and a slight surplus. And we stand here today recognizing a couple of things, sit here today. We can never go back to where we came. Of course, a lot of that was the result of this terrible economy. We can never go back to that deficit, so we have to restrain spending. But at the same time, we can't forget that there was great damage done along the way, that those cuts, had and have a real cost to people, whether it's education, whether it's higher education, or whether it is the public safety and the safety net, as we call it, health and human services. Advocates, by the way, who generally don't have as much of a forceful lobbying presence at the Capitol as others. And so my approach this year with the budget, and it's not just me, it's my Senate colleagues, what we said was, we've got to find a balance here. We have to agree with the governor's frame and general position that we cannot make up for all that has been lost. We can't, as much as we would like to. But at the same time, we cannot so underreach that we don't, in a very focused way, try to make some reinvestments in areas that have been hurt the worst. And that led me to dental, to mental health. And on the career tech ed side, that's less of the budget has been cut horribly, but in my view, one of the real foundations for building a high-wage economy going forward.
And you talked about the governor's approach and your approach and your Senate colleagues. Do you think that they are generally aligned?
Yes, they are aligned. And of course, this time of year, everyone loves to look at the differences, which is appropriate. And you know, I would just say, when I look at my experience working with actually 3 different governors, in some ways it doesn't matter. They matter because they're different and their priorities are different. But in terms of some of the tension points between, or my frustrations at times, I could repeat the same things I've said this budget cycle that I've said in all the previous budget cycles. Because the executive is the executive. And the governor has a larger bully pulpit. And I think it's his job to be the most vocal about fiscal restraint. And then the legislature, we are different. We, of course, are an amalgam of many members. But it's our job, the way I view it, to push a little bit. If there's no creative tension, then we're not pushing each other hard enough. And that's what we have here. We are basically aligned. We all agree that fiscal stability is the first priority, that we need a significant reserve, that we need to aggressively pay down debt, and the governor has, to his credit, suggested significant augmentations for education and higher education. We are now negotiating about a few other restorations or investments, and they're not on the margin to the people that are affected, or in my view, to the quality of life of California, but they're on the margins when it comes to the budget numbers. And I'm relatively confident that we're going to come together pretty nicely, actually, have the 3rd on-time budget in a row, and start that new tradition in California. 110 degrees, not in the air-conditioned capital. That's the
Great.
deal.
So negotiations are possible to reach a resolution with the resources that are available. One of the areas that has certainly been among the most controversial this year has been what is now being referred to as the local control funding formula. That would be a very different approach to school funding than we've seen in the past. The governor said last year he wanted to direct more funding to low-income districts with more low-income students and more English learners. He didn't succeed last year in those efforts. He came back this year and put it in the budget again. And there have been a lot of discussions in the legislature about this. Do you think this year is the year where there will be some agreement between the governor and the legislature on local control funding formula, and what might that agreement look like?
The answer to the question, will we come to an agreement on a local control funding formula this year, and actually within the next 10 days? Mm-hmm. I think the answer, you're getting the to-the-moment news here, everybody. We are not fooling around. This is, the answer is yes. This is another example where the administration and the majority in the legislature, and again, I want to be clear, I speak for the Senate here, I don't speak for the Assembly, but I think we're all fairly well aligned here. We share the common goal, we share the common values, and those goals and values revolve around the principle of equity, that kids who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds ought to have more resources spent well, key piece, in order to be able to achieve what they want, their dreams in life. So the governor put out a robust plan in January that had a number of elements, the main elements that I agreed with, which was, and my colleagues agreed with, which was to collapse a lot of the existing categorical programs and put that money and the growth money into a formula that would differentiate between students of high poverty and high need and those who are not in that category. But when you're talking about changing decades of how we finance public schools, the details really do matter here. And I'll give you a couple of examples of the detail and where we've disagreed and where we hope to come together over the next couple of days. Number one, you want to make sure in this kind of a situation, especially with a growing economy, that no districts are losers, if you will. That by shifting to this kind of formula, that just say a typical suburban district without high levels of poverty don't find their funding to be lower than what it was if we had kept the current system. That's number one. So we're trying to address that. Number two, the governor suggested an equity formula that to me was about 80% there, but I objected and still object to about 20% of it. He says that every child who is free and reduced lunch or meets the definition of poverty, or foster kids, ought to get a 35% bump. Right on. I agree. He then says that if those same kids are in school districts that have more than 50% poverty, that those kids ought to get an additional 35%. I want those kids, by the way, to get every penny that they can. But there's a piece missing that really is one of the key tenets of the current negotiation. What about the kids in poor schools, in poor neighborhoods, who aren't in poor districts? They don't get that so-called concentration factor. And so we have said, and the Senate bill, SB 69, seeks to address, what about those kids? The theory of concentration, I think, has some legitimacy, that if you're a low-income kid that's going to school with kids who are not low income, you benefit from that. And where schools are concentrated, or where there's a concentration of poverty, the kids need that extra financial boost because there isn't that benefit. But is that disadvantage based upon poverty in a district, or poverty in a neighborhood, or poverty in a school? So we're trying to address that. And we are running formulas as we speak to try to figure that out.
And is the governor open to thinking of that way?
It's a positive discussion.
Good.
Third thing, real quick,
Yeah.
because it is important as well. While we want to collapse categoricals by and large, I think there are a few that stand out that we don't want, and I'm going to mention two that we're fighting for. Partnership academies. Thank you. And yes, please, everybody sit down. Partnership academies and the ROP programs. Because one of the proposals that we're making in the budget and that we're on our way, I hope, to negotiating successfully is we want to put an additional $250 million into so-called linked learning, the Long Beach model of combining high standards, academic rigor, and career application across the board. That's what we want to do, not either or. You don't either go to college or you go the voc ed route. Combine rigor and relevance. If we eliminate ROP, I worry that it's kind of a supplantation, right? We're getting rid of this, and then we're adding this. No, I want to build on the base of career education and grow it in California so that we have more Long Beaches. So that's a third area of current discussion.
Sounds like you have a lot of work to do in the next few days.
Yay.
Okay.
We sure do.
Good.
You can find me in the Capitol on Saturday if anybody wants to come by.
All right. So I want to turn to higher education for a moment, another important part of the budget. I noticed on your biography you have your bachelor's degree from UCLA. You have your law degree from UC Davis. I have a master's degree from Santa Barbara. I've got a PhD from Berkeley. So obviously public higher education has meant something to us being here today. And it means a lot to the future of California. PPIC has been doing a lot of work on this. What are your thoughts about how to increase access and make sure that public higher education is affordable in California?
Well, this is an area where money really does matter. I mean, the cuts we have made have harmed our public institutions of higher education. Mm-hmm. There's no question about it. When you look at the public share of the state share of contribution to all three systems, it has gone down as a result of the recession. And we've seen the impacts. Harder to get classes. You know, a lot of us have kids who are in that age range, and we all know that if you don't sign up right at the moment that you're supposed to sign up, you're on a waiting list. And greater expense. And what happens, of course, with the reduced access is that it's taking young people longer to get through higher education. So if it's not enough to have 4 years of student loans or 4 years of debt, how about 5 or 6 years? And then if you want to go on to graduate school, you can just add to that. And so one of the good things about this budget and the beginnings of our economic recovery is that the governor's budget, and we agree completely, includes some significant reinvestment in all three systems, and that is a good thing. Now, is that going to solve the whole problem overnight? No. You don't make up for 5, 6 years of cuts in 1 year, but we're on our way. And then maybe the other half of your question, though, is the more controversial one. So, you know, sometimes I just can't help myself and wade into these controversial areas because I introduced this bill.
I've noticed.
You've noticed, yeah. 520, which I don't know, I thought was going to be not controversial. It suggests, the bill says that all three systems of higher education ought to begin developing a protocol for evaluating online courses for credit. And as the bill has been amended, you know, throughout, it's gone through the process in the Senate, we've put the faculty senates of all three systems clearly in control of course approval. But we have said that we want to see a statewide system for approving courses for credit, not just a campus by campus pilot that goes on now. And we've said the partnerships can be public-public across sectors, between campuses, or, and this is the controversial part, they can be private-public. That the faculty can work with the Coursera's of the world and the other online providers to try to look at some of the most impacted undergraduate courses and offer them online to students for credit with full faculty quality control, requirement of interaction between faculty and student. But the goal, obviously, is to take some of those long waiting lists and to make it easier for students to get their credit for the courses they need in order to move on and ultimately graduate. Well, got big opposition. Got it anyway, getting it through anyways. Organized labor, my friends, I mean, they don't like the bill. And they don't like it, because they think that it's, I think, a camel's nose under the tent kind of thing, that we're going to begin privatizing public education and substituting online for face-to-face instruction. Of course, that's not only not my intent, that's not what's happening here. The question is, can online be used as an adjunct, as an addition, as a supplement, not as a supplantation? And I must tell you, if you want to know, just speak a minute about what I think is going to happen long term in this society, I think, going back to high school for a moment, if you allow me to shift, that what we need to move towards and where we are going to move towards is much more apprenticeship, experiential learning outside of the traditional classroom. I want to call today at this forum for this state and this country seriously considering the Swiss model of high school education and college education. And it relates to this online question because over half the high school students in Switzerland have apprenticeships 3 days a week. A lot of their education is taking place at the workplace. Now, the remainder is largely classroom instruction. But can't you foresee the day with technology being what it is that we begin transforming this system from high school on to a system where the majority of the learning takes place at a workplace, and the lecture part of the course instruction takes place in a very different way than what we have considered in the past. And so I say to my friends in organized labor, lead the change, because, and make sure that it's done right. Make sure that we are not only respecting, but putting in the lead the people with the expertise and the faculty, but shape it rather than have it overwhelm them and us, because I think it's going to happen.
Good. I'd like to...
I probably need to go now.
No. You need to stay, because we have a lot more to talk about.
Okay.
So the big change that's coming at the federal level, ACA implementation,
Yep.
healthcare reform. Is the state ready for it? What does the legislature need to do this year to make sure that the state is ready for the changes that are about to come?
This is another very timely item and very timely question, because we hope to wrap up this whole question of how the state implements the ACA over the next 10 days. Now, it's not like we're starting from scratch. We're one of the first states in the country to have established the insurance exchange for small business and for individuals above the medium poverty line. Mm-hmm. So that's well on its way, and we're ahead of all other states in the nation, and they just came out with their first premium their premium lists and showed that this fear, at least in the short term, about these great price spikes, isn't happening, and that's a good thing. Our part now in the legislature is to define Medi-Cal expansion, because part of the ACA is to say that not everybody is going to buy the product in the exchange. There are people, again, a lot of low-income working people who are still going to need the public health program, the Medi-Cal program. And so that now consists of two major points that are still, quote, being negotiated. Number one, we want to make sure that the benefit package that is being offered to people is an excellent benefit package. For example, I want to make sure that mental health is included in the benefit package. Number two, the relationship between the state and the county is at issue here, because right now counties are responsible for providing health care for the indigent Californians. They do through public hospitals, and some counties do so through their own health and clinic programs. The theory, and I think there's some reality to it, is if those people are going to be covered by the ACA, by Medi-Cal expansion, the counties are actually going to save a lot of money. The state wants that money, because the state's going to be on the hook beginning in 2017 for part of the cost of the ACA for those who are newly eligible, and 50% beginning now for those currently eligible who sign up. The negotiation is about how much money. And the counties are arguing that, hey, we'll give you our savings, but we still are responsible for covering undocumented immigrants, other indigent Californians who, for whatever reason, will not sign up for Medi-Cal. And then there's that issue again of public health and mental health, where the counties say, we don't want it to be a zero sum. You need to leave us real resources so that we can begin building on our mental health system. So another complicated area, but an area that we are all hard at work addressing and hope to get finalized by the budget deadline.
Good. I wonder if we could talk for a moment about corrections realignment.
Yeah.
And how that's working now, and if there's anything the legislature needs to do in this session as we talk about areas where there are tensions between the county and the state. And this has also become a political issue now, where a candidate for governor has said, you know, basically, this isn't working.
Is it working? That went well.
Yeah.
That went well.
I know. But is it working? Is corrections realignment working? What else does the legislature need to do to help counties? And maybe we can talk about mental health.
This is where mental health fits right in. So the federal courts have been managing part of our prison population now for a number of years. And they continue to do so. In 2011, we passed, and the governor helped lead, this realignment proposal, which basically said we have to shift more nonviolent offenders to the county level for those people to either serve their sentences in county jail or to have alternative sentencing with ankle bracelets and that sort of thing, depending upon the nature of the crime. And that has been a very tough thing for counties, but they have not walked away from it. They've been real partners with the state to try to make this work. And I think it's worked pretty darn well, albeit nothing is perfect. There are always going to be those, there's going to be a crime, or there has been, where people could say, well, look, that was realignment. And my response is, and you know, don't say this lightly, Philip Garrido committed his crimes under the old parole system. So you can always pick a horrific circumstance or a horrific situation, but you have to look at what is smart, rational policy, and I think realignment is. Mm-hmm. But the story doesn't end there, because despite the fact that thousands of inmates have now left the state correctional facilities and are now being held accountable at the county level, the federal courts continue to say, you haven't released enough prisoners. And the governor, who I think has done, we have our disagreements, I think he's done an excellent job managing the prisons. There's no more fights with the CCPOA, there's not a lot of that stuff that contributed to the feeling like it was dysfunctional. I think he's doing a good job. The governor has appealed, and I support that. And everybody says, well, what's the legislature going to do? Well, we're not going to spend this precious money, if I have anything to say about it, on building more jail beds or prison beds. And yet, depending upon whether the appeal is successful, there is going to be a clash here, because the counties are saying, we can't take any more of these inmates. We're already doing realignment. So there's no answer. There's no single answer, but here isn't an answer. Because what the federal courts don't have to worry about, and I say this with the greatest of respect, because they have their job to do, and that's to interpret the Constitution. They don't have to balance competing budget priorities. And so nobody's asking or answering the question, okay, if we cannot release people, or if we can't take more people from state prison to the counties, and we don't want to release more people early, but we recognize that inevitably, virtually all these inmates, with the exception of the people in for murder and the most serious crimes, are going to get out. What are we doing to make sure they don't get back in? And this is where mental health comes in. And, you know, I have made this not my singular, but probably my top public policy passion for a lot of reasons. But one of them is, in my opinion, this touches every single thing we care about. You care about criminal justice, You need to address mental health. You care about kids not doing well in school who have problems, talk about mental health. You care about, thank you. You care about Newtown, Aurora, and violence in our society, got to deal with mental health. You care about homelessness, you got to deal with mental health. So our proposal for this year's budget, and again, I feel good about getting it through over the next 10 days, is we say the following. The voters passed Prop 63 in 2004, $1 billion a year. Exactly the kind of system, by the way, that we want, despite whatever the critics will tell you. 25% spent every year on prevention and early intervention. Remarkable programs where schools and law enforcement are working together to identify kids who make threats or are otherwise seen as a potential danger, pulling them out and getting them the help they need. 75%, 27,000 people currently in full-service partnerships, whatever it takes to help them, the most seriously ill. But it's not all good. While that $1 billion has grown, we have lost, one estimate is $700 million a year out of the pre-existing funding in the system because of the budget cuts. And what's missing is infrastructure. And here's how it plays out. Too many people are showing up at emergency rooms, at county jails, at social service facilities like Loaves and Fishes, who does a wonderful job in Sacramento, but their job is to feed people and help them, on an emergency basis, with serious mental health issues, and there isn't the capacity or the infrastructure to do anything about it. So we have this wonderful array of services over here, and we aren't getting enough people to them. So I call for the following in this budget: $142 million on a one-time basis to build capacity for 2,000 crisis stabilization and residential beds in California, so that people don't have to languish for more than 72 hours in an emergency room. So if the cops pick somebody up, instead of sending them to jail when they obviously are in the midst of a psychotic episode, they can take them to a safe place with 24-hour care to help get them stable. And then we want to hire 600 triage workers stationed at jails and at emergency rooms and at social service facilities who can assess, refer people who need it to these beds, and then ultimately case manage them to the right level of service so that people aren't cycling in and out of these systems that can't care for them and that cost way too much money to care for them in ineffective ways. And if we can build that infrastructure combined with the services, still won't be perfect, but fewer people will fall through those proverbial cracks. We'll be able to address, I think to a significant degree, this issue of recidivism around people who need help and whose minds aren't right.
Well,
so that's another thing in this year's budget.
Thanks. Thank you. Let's turn from the here and now for a few questions about the near-term future. Today is the 35th anniversary of Prop 13, which passed on June 6, 1978.
Wow.
And
we should have picked another day here.
You've had a number of members of your within the Senate who've said they're interested in making changes to Prop 13. Are the voters going to be asked to change Prop 13 next year?
I don't know, but we should be open to and we should debate lowering vote thresholds at the local level for special taxes. Prop 13, and I read a lot of history and I know there are various versions of this, but here's always been the anomaly to me. That if you're at the local government level and you're an elected official or an elected body and you see a specific need, the roadways need improving, and you put out a tax measure to your voters, city or county, that says we're going to spend these dollars that we raise on the following transportation projects, and you are specific to the penny, that's a 2/3 vote. If, however, you shrug your shoulders and you say, not that any elected official does it this way, but you shrug your shoulders and you say, you know what? We want you to raise taxes, but we're not going to tell you how we're going to spend your money, i.e. a general tax. That's a majority vote. I don't understand that. And I don't agree with it. I think we ought to lower the voter threshold for special taxes for local governments. That's real realignment, by the way. If you want to reduce the size of state government, then you empower those who are closer to the people to be able to affect their destiny with other than a 2/3 supermajority vote for specific investments. And so I could see next year, and there will be a debate next year, and I would support the idea of putting on the ballot, whether it's for education or transportation or infrastructure, lowering the vote thresholds for certain kinds of taxes for those kinds of public priorities. Is 2014 the right year to take that before the voters? I don't know yet. What we have said is that I don't want to have this debate in 13. Yeah. I want 13 to be a year where we don't talk about taxes or we don't take a lot of action on these sorts of issues, because I want it to be a year of building upon the Prop 30 victory, the balanced budget, targeted investments in a few things that will make a difference, keeping the budget balanced. And then in 14, you know, we really have these discussions and debates about the 2014 ballot and see where it goes.
Let me ask you another question about 2014. You've talked about an interest in reforming the initiative process, which will be 102 years old in October, yes, on October 10th. So where might that go next year in terms of the legislature asking voters to change the initiative process?
Another very serious issue. I've laid out a couple of ideas. There are many ideas. I would like to bring back some form of the indirect initiative in California. The initiative process and representative government, in my view, have gotten too far apart. And why can't we think intelligently about how they might work better together? The idea of giving the legislature time, for example, after signatures are submitted to the Secretary of State, to not unilaterally, but working with the initiative proponent to try to craft a compromise. And if that compromise can be crafted with the consent of the initiative proponent, and an act of the legislature or the signature of the governor could substitute for the submitted initiative, that's the kind of idea that I'd like to explore, and other or variations of that. Mm-hmm. And I would like to see something done on that. Again, whether it's 2014 or not, okay, I don't know right now.
Well, we've promised our audience an opportunity to ask some questions, but I have a two-part question I want to ask you before we do that. Part one of my question is about what do you most want to accomplish during the remainder of your term as Senate Pro Tem? And part two is, do you have any thoughts about what's next for Darrell Steinberg after 2014?
In terms of, let me take question number one.
Okay.
I think I've laid it out actually today
Okay.
pretty well. I mean, I think I've described my priorities. You always have to have causes, and to me it's keeping that, leaving, knowing that I was part of going from that $42 billion deficit to a balanced budget, mm-hmm, to finishing, at least for this stage of my career, my work in the mental health area, redefining, or at least being part of redefining education reform to not just be a proxy fight between warring factions about, you know, who should control the schools, but actually substantive reform around what we teach and how we teach it, infusing academic rigor and career application across the board. Those are my priorities, and I have many more, by the way, mm-hmm, but those are your
top priorities.
Those are my top. In terms of my own future, I don't have any grand announcement to make here. But I can share with you that I don't think, and I hope, it's because it's always up to voters, I hope that my public service career is not over in 2014. I love what I do. I've had the greatest experiences and opportunities that anyone can imagine, and I would like to continue. Whether there's an opportunity in 2014 that I really want to do as opposed to something that everyone says you should do, I think is a different question. And so I don't know yet, but I could see myself sitting out for a while, doing a few other things in life, and trying to come back to the public service in one way or another. But you know, things change quickly, and you never know. But I will tell you this: I will, at the end of this, it will be 20 years of public service, and if it did end, it will have been great. I don't know if it was great for the people, but great for me. And it's so. Let's see where that goes.
Well, when we were having lunch, you were saying that you were having fun. And the fact that we have somebody in public service who is having fun is terrific to hear. And this has been a lot of fun for me to have a chance to talk with you. And we could go on and on. I mean, there's so many other topics I'd love to talk to you about, but I really feel the obligation to turn it over to our audience now and see if there's some questions out there that we haven't covered that like to ask, somebody'd like to ask Senator Steinberg. And let me just say thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I continue to be concerned about the backsliding in our commitment to access to public higher education for all eligible students in California, and the pricing out of numbers of our young people seeking higher education. Could you comment on the future? Any improvements that are envisioned in the future?
Well, I tried to address it a few months ago, but I'm happy to sort of reiterate briefly. I think higher education is
Maybe
an area.
briefly so we can get a few more questions in.
Money matters. We've got to reinvest back into all three systems of higher education. But number two, I do think we need to be open to innovation, including online education, in a way that will create more access for young people. And I suppose I'd add a third one. I think we need to look at Switzerland and give more young people paid apprenticeship opportunities as a way of paying down what they owe on their education.
Other question, maybe from this side, yeah. And let's try to make the question succinct, like you're a pollster. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Steinberg. I'm Annie Fox from Pico, California, and you spoke to the problem of indigent care in the upcoming negotiations. I'm wondering if you've considered the consumer alternative that would preserve that money for a few years and then require counties to at least keep preserving those public services as the money gets slowly absorbed.
Yes, but it is a negotiation, and $300 million is assumed in the state budget, which is the amount that the counties are estimated to save. And I think whether it's 300 or not, all that will be worked out once the test is developed to determine how much they actually save. The bottom line, though, is that whatever the number is, there must be enough money left for the counties to be able to invest in providing health care to the indigent population, undocumented immigrants, public health, and mental health.
Question from this side of the room. Back there.
Senator, after you resolve the budget issues with the Assembly, will you be able to grapple the major question of how to reconcile your two summer recess schedules?
No.
Okay, well, next question.
Minor in the scheme of things.
Over here.
Everyone will get 3 weeks, so it'll be fun.
to the budget negotiations. The governor has put in $1 billion one-time funding for implementation of Common Core state standards. Is that likely to remain in the budget?
I think that will likely remain in the budget.
Okay.
Money for Common Core is very important.
How about a question
Including
over
teacher
here?
training.
Right here. Yes. Do we have a microphone for, because if we don't, we won't be hearing it on the webcast, so. Yes.
Good afternoon, Senator Steinberg. The question is about the $1 billion. Will that be towards some of the successful charter schools that's getting kids to college also in the low-income areas?
Which $1 billion are you talking about?
The Common
SB
Core.
Common
69.
Core, I've got to go back and check, but I believe that the money applies to both public schools and public charter schools.
And Amy, before you go all the way back, there's one question over here. It's good that we have a track star doing this today, so thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, Senator. Thank you so much for your comments. As a recent graduate, I think that the conversation about the access to education is very important, but I think it's also really important to make sure that we're getting the experience that we need to be employable.
Yes.
So I'm just wondering, you spoke to this a little bit, but how are we going to ensure that in those apprenticeships, the apprentices, so to speak, are getting the real life experience that employers actually value? And also, how do we ensure that younger workers are really taken seriously in the workforce today? Thank you.
Well, I appreciate the question. I can say this, and I'm going to overgeneralize because the system is not doing what you just asked about today. It is not. How many Cristo Rey high schools are there? And those of you who may be familiar with Cristo Rey in Sacramento, that have every student participating in paid internships during their high school years. We need more of that because we hear constantly from the business community and business leaders that California is not doing enough to prepare young people for the workforce. And it is the combination of academic learning and practical application that ought to become the driving force behind education reform and building our modern economy. So I talk about Switzerland again, where more than half the young people have apprenticeships 3 days a week during high school. How do we build linked learning, career education, voc ed, whatever you want to call voc ed with standards, to scale in California? It doesn't matter to me, by the way, whether or not you want to be a construction worker or you want to go to law school or engineering school. I believe in the combination of academic rigor and career application across the board. And by the way, in Switzerland, the standards are high enough in the high schools so that if you're in the construction apprenticeship and in your junior year you decide, you know what, no, I don't want to do that. I want to become a doctor, that you have taken all the courses that leave you eligible to be able to go that pathway instead of what you originally intended to do, which is the antidote against tracking, which was the prior criticism of vocational education.
Question over here.
Good afternoon, Senator.
Hi.
I wanted to address regarding restoring the 2009 cuts, why podiatry, I wanted to inquire about your opinions about podiatry not being re-included along with dental, please.
I would love to bring back podiatry, but we can't do it all. And we chose dental, in large part because dental has such a key connection with physical health. Many of you heard my story because I've said it publicly a number of times. I was always motivated on this, but this has to happen, I said to myself, after I visited the California Dental Association volunteer dental fair at Cal Expo in October. And I thought I was going up to a Saturday morning coffee klatch to thank the dentists and, you know, for volunteering their time, you know, thing we politicians do on Saturday mornings. And instead what I saw was it really disturbed me. I mean, there were so many people wrapped around Cal Expo waiting in line, not to get their teeth cleaned, but to deal with a dental abscess that hadn't been remedied in years, or root canals, or people who had lost all their teeth. The stories of people who were afraid to re-enter the workforce because of their physical appearance, because they had no front teeth. And I said to myself then, I say it now, this is California? No, no. People should be able to see a darn dentist, to be able to fill a cavity or to have some preventative dental care. And so I'd like to bring back all the other so-called optional benefits, including podiatry, but dental, I don't know, just cried out to me. And we've made it a priority, and we're, hoping that we can begin, I should say, to get that restored as part of this year's budget.
Senator Steinberg, once again, I want to thank you for your time and also for your service.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
And I think we all agree that we leave here much better informed about the here and now in California, about the opportunities for the future. And I want to thank our sponsors. I want to again thank Donna and Jui for being part of the program today.
Thank you, guys.
I want to encourage you to fill out your evaluation form. And I want to thank you for being part of this conversation today, which has been, I think, one that has lifted all of our spirits going forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thanks a lot. It was fun.
Always a good. So many things I wanted to talk to you about.